First, I'd like to say a very warm thank you to Professor Chiwala for that wonderfully warm introduction. I should tell you that if my daughter was in the audience, she would have been extremely bemused by that introduction, especially when Professor said he's been doing this for 30 years, because my daughter, quite correctly, I think, comes to the conclusion, as she once said to me, "Dad, you really crap at your work, aren't you?" I said, "Why do you say that?" She said, "You've been fighting against poverty, human rights, for gender equality for so long, and things seem to be getting worse and worse." I'm really, really pleased to be here at the University of the Western Cape, and especially at an event organized by the Department of Lifelong Learning, because as some of you know, my own background is very much in adult education, and UWC holds a special place in the heart of many of us. My first time actually at UWC was in 1985, when I was on the run from the security police from Durban, and somebody suggested, actually Cape Town's not a bad place to go hide. So I came to Cape Town, and then somebody said, there's a bus leaving from UWC to Craddock for the funeral of 4 of our comrades that were brutally murdered by the apartheid regime. And my first time at UWC was to come catch that bus from UWC to Craddock in the Eastern Cape for the funeral of our leaders that were killed. On a lighter note, I should say that I'm also very pleased that I actually got here, because there was a bit of a telephone breakdown of communication among some of my colleagues who support me at the Greenpeace International office in Amsterdam, where what was the Julius Nyerere lecture, one of my colleagues who's not familiar with the African names actually started referring to it as the Julius lecture. And one of my colleagues said, I thought Greenpeace is about promoting low consumption lifestyles. We understand this guy Julius bought a house in the most posh neighborhood in South Africa and then demolished it and built a 8 times as expensive a house afterwards. So I'm really pleased to be here. We live in an extremely fragile and challenging moment in world history. Some of us have described it as a perfect storm. Others have called it a boiling point. What we mean by this is that in the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen a convergence of a range of crises in a very concentrated time span. Some of you might remember we first had the fuel price crisis, which led to a food price crisis. And by the way, even though fuel prices came down, food prices did not come down proportionally. We have an ongoing poverty crisis, but let's just name that poverty crisis. That poverty crisis takes the lives of close to 40,000 men, women, and children every single day globally, mainly in the developing world, and a large number on our continent from preventable diseases. We have a climate crisis, which is already taking the lives of 350,000 people annually, according to the Kofi Annan Foundation. Then added to all of these crises, around 2008, we had the financial crisis. And sadly, those with power in government and business, in developing and developed countries, only at that point, they actually stood up and said, actually we're in crisis and we must do something about it. Sadly, the response to that crisis has been not to deal with the crisis in a connected way and understand how these different crises are actually connected to each other. Those with power globally and domestically and on this continent have chosen to treat each of these crises as if they are in standalone silos, ignoring one of the very important wisdoms that we actually received from the feminist movement historically. Now, the feminist movement gave us a horrible word, but a very powerful concept. And that word is intersectionality, right? It's a bit of a tongue twister, but behind the word intersectionality is a very powerful idea that you can't address gender equality, for example, without understanding how gender intersects with race, class, religion, ability, and so on. And right now, that's one of the shifts that we need, and we're not getting it. The other key problem is that the response to all of these crises, globally and on the African continent, is really largely incremental tinkering. If you want, it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic while it was sinking. Just to remember, it was recently the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. And largely, what you see happening is, in fact, system maintenance, system recovery, rather than system redesign. Let us be very, very clear. If we do not challenge the current dominant socio-economic paradigm, we will not advance social justice, we will not advance economic justice, gender justice, environmental justice, or anything else. The current system that we have in place is fundamentally broken and has to be addressed as a matter of urgency.